He does, but let me say, so, of course, the whole argument on these derivatives, of course, these are these experts, they know what they're doing. So this is what Summers said in his testimony. This was very typical of his position. He said, and this is testimony, why you had to have this Commodity Futures Modernization Act. Mr. Chairman, the American over-the-counter derivatives market is second to none. In a few short years, it has assumed a major role in our own economy and become a magnet for derivative business from around the world. The dramatic development of this market has occurred on the basis of complex and fragile legal and legislative understandings which the Commodity Futures Trading Commission released, that's the Brooks report, put into question. And then he explains why they don't need regulation. He says, first, the parties to these kinds of contracts are largely sophisticated financial institutions that would appear to be eminently capable of protecting themselves from fraud and counterparty insolvencies, and most of which are already subject to basic safety and soundness regulations under existing banking and security laws. Okay? Think of the disaster that has unfolded. And by the way, those existing laws he swept aside with his legislation. Second, given the nature of the underlying assets involved namely supplies of financial exchange and other financial instruments, there would seem to be little scope for market manipulation. Now, if I had written a sentence like that, I would not be writing columns today. I think I have sufficient humility. I would be off in a retreat examining how I work. Okay? When you think of what has actually unfolded, there would seem to be little scope for market manipulation of the kind seen in traditional agricultural commodities. We should have the stability we have for traditional commodities. We have exactly the opposite. And to make your point about the Republicans, the thing about the expertise, remember the Committee to Save the World, the cover of Time magazine, and at one point when the banking meltdown was occurring, and this I got from Paulson's book, George Bush was sitting there in the White House with Henry Paulson. Now, Henry Paulson, like Robert Rubin, was at Goldman Sachs. Henry Paulson was the chair. Goldman Sachs was doing a lot of these collateralized debt obligations. Okay. And George Bush, who had the charm of being willing to admit his ignorance, asked him, he said, how did this happen? Here's the President of the United States. Our economic world is collapsing. How did this happen? And Paulson writes in his memoir, it was a humbling question for someone from the financial sector to be asked. After all, we were the ones responsible. Okay? That's an honest statement. But when you read Paulson's memoir, he goes on to say that when he was talking to Bush at that time, he still did not know that housing mortgages were at the heart of these collateralized debt obligations that were causing all the trouble. He did not know what made the toxic assets toxic. You have to keep that in mind when we accept this idea. They know what they're doing. They are smart, and so forth. And in fact, one CEO after another has gotten up before Congress and said, I really didn't understand. I didn't know what the AIG unit was really doing in London. Now, they were warned in real time, which goes to the Clinton question. Long-term capital management went belly up when Clinton was still president. Went belly up before the Commodity Futures Modernization Act passed. And went belly up precisely because of this kind of financial shenanigans. They had the warning, and they didn't heed it. And what happens, very interesting, my last summer's shot here, one of the terrible things about the legislation that he pushed through, and he really did push it through, was that it contained something called the Enron loophole. Okay? And there's very interesting exchange I don't know if you followed the Enron case, but if you lived in California, you knew it was a disaster of what happened to gaming in the market. And of course, the company went belly up and a lot of people got hurt. But people don't seem to understand that the connection between that and the radical deregulation. Enron could not have existed were it not for changes in the political economy. Enron was just a normal little traditional trading company. They needed the laws changed. And it's true, they had a great deal of influence with Bush, but they had it also with Clinton. And so there's an interesting exchange in the University of California, Berkeley. It's sort of been the lead plaintiff against Enron, and so there's a great amount of material, emails and everything. But one of the things that I found just before in the hotel, I was looking over my Summers references, because I thought I'm going to be here. So when Summers was Treasury Secretary, there's something in the Enron, there's a lot in the Enron of how did they get the Enron loophole, making it possible. And by the way, Wendy Graham, who was pushing all this, what did happen to Wendy Graham after? Wendy Graham went on the Enron board. She was on their audit committee when they went belly up, okay? What happened to Phil Graham when he left the Senate? He went to work for UBS, up to his eyeballs in this. So we're talking about major league hustlers. You know, people who get legislation passed and really are rewarded only. So here was Summers. And Summers, okay, so there's a problem with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, and Enron wants, it's a loophole put in. And so these are the emails that came from their lobbyists, one of whom, by the way, is now working for the Fed. Linda Robertson, she was in Summers' assistant in the Treasury Department and became the head of the Enron Washington office. And this comes from the Congressional Research Service. And it explains what happened. And then, but the main thing is, there's a letter, we're not getting what we need, and Ken Lay is out of the country. And then someone said, we've called Treasury. Treasury was Summers. Treasury has sent over new wording, and it's in the bill, and Ken is going to rejoice. It's in the emails. This is how it works. And in terms of Summers' reward, I don't think Harvard was big time money. What's it, 600,000 a year or something, 570,000. But everybody seems to forget when Summers went to work with Obama as an advisor, he got $8 million while he was advising Obama. He got $4 million from the D.E. Shaw hedge fund, okay, and he got $4 million from Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and these other big Wall Street firms. Goldman Sachs gave him $135,000 for 1 half-hour talk. We don't call that bribery. $8 million bucks, you're advising a candidate to the president, and you're getting that kind of money, and it's not even an issue. Nor did we make it an issue, and I'm somebody who very enthusiastically supported Obama. I gave $500 bucks 36 hours before the polls closed because I was worried about him. My wife had already maxed out, you know, and we all looked the other way when the guy said he wasn't going to take public financing. And lo and behold, Wall Street ended up being the major source of his contributions.